Hello, Jeremy Brusch. This is Jeremy Brusch from UT Southwestern. I understand that you are a graduate student, so what initially led you to do neuroscience?
When I was a kid, I was always very good at science, but then I found out, I don't know, late elementary school, maybe middle school, that my grandmother had schizophrenia. And then
Hmm.
I learned the idea of what a hallucination was. And,
Hmm.
my grandma was weird and quirky and stuff like that, but I was always fascinated by the idea of hallucinations. And
Hmm.
so in high school, I remember we had access to the library computers had access to science databases. And so
Hmm.
like I did a preliminary search on schizophrenia and what a hallucination is, and I read this great paper that I've never been able to find since about like what it's like to be schizophrenic. It's written
Hmm.
by a schizophrenic professor, or
Hmm.
maybe he was a doctor or something, but he like managed to overcome his illness, and you get
Hmm.
to hear his experience about like, the delusions, the paranoia, the hallucinations, and things like that.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, well, your entire experience comes from your brain. How does a fake experience happen?
Hmm.
And so I always knew I wanted to go to medicine or science or something. And
Hmm.
so I was initially going to go into neurology, but
Hmm.
I've got terrible hands. I'm very,
Hmm.
very shaky, another thing
Hmm.
that fascinates me. And so surgery was never going to happen for me. And then I
Hmm.
tried medicine. I got my EMT certificate,
Hmm.
and maybe this is petty, but I realized that there's a lot of paperwork that has to do with the medical
Yeah.
field, and I
Yeah.
can't stand paperwork. I was like,
Hmm.
no, I'm not doing this. I did it for a
Hmm.
couple months. And I was like, this sucks.
Hmm.
Uh, and I tried science. I joined a neuroscience lab, Dr. Goulding's lab, and
Hmm.
really fell in love with the process and
Hmm.
neuroscience because the brain is it's a fascinating organ,
Hmm.
and it has to do with information and things like that more than
Hmm.
health.
Oh, I also, regarding the Salk Institute, I do realize that you are affiliated with the Golding Lab. Is that correct?
The Goulding, I was formerly a fellow of the Goulding Lab, yes.
Oh, yes. Can you tell me a bit about what you researched there or what you did in the Golding Lab?
The Goulding Lab historically researched the spinal cord. So,
Hmm.
I was initially interested in the brain. When I applied for the job, I didn't know what the spinal cord was cool for. If you look at the textbooks, everybody says the spinal cord is essentially just a relay in the
Hmm.
step. Your brain creates signals and needs to go through the spinal cord to get to your muscles. And it was
Hmm.
in Dr. Goulding's labs that I learned that that is not true. The
Hmm.
spinal cord itself is doing a lot of computations. It's just all subconscious. So
Hmm.
there's papers out there that show that your spinal cord has a map of your body that is independent of your brain. So
Hmm.
like they did an experiment in the frog where they severed the connection between the two and put like acid on one hand and the other
Hmm.
hand could reach over and wipe it off. So it was able
Hmm.
to like sense that there was something bad going on, know where it is, and know how to navigate the muscles to get the other hand over, and knew which action to take to relieve it. I mean, an
Hmm.
insane amount of computations that are happening in the spinal cord. So while I
Hmm.
was there, I was doing work dedicated to finding out how different types of cells in the spinal cord are arranged. I was doing an
Hmm.
anatomy project because kind of
Hmm.
that's the first step in understanding this stuff. But
Right.
it was also where I learned that like, to how does when you're developing and your body is starting to develop, how does a neuron in your brain know to be in the brain and a neuron in your spinal cord know to be a spinal cord neuron? And they have
Right.
different functions and different properties, and how do they know all that? And it's all genetically specified through development. And so the field is getting to this point now where you can define cell types based off of how they were born during development and what kind of genes they express in
Hmm.
adulthood, because
Hmm.
there could be two neurons right next to each other performing similar jobs, but they're expressing two different genes in adulthood. And so it was figuring out the anatomy of those, and then other people I was collaborating with were
Hmm.
trying to think like, well, why would they, if they're expressing different genes, maybe they're doing something different functionally within the circuit.
Hmm. For high schoolers or recent undergrads, like students in their undergrad who are involved in like neuroscience and want to pursue this at like a higher institution, like a graduate school or a medical school, What what general advice would you have for them?
Well, take every opportunity you can get, and honestly, like the first opportunity is the hardest to get
Hmm.
because I I got a work study when I
Hmm.
was joining university. So yeah, if you're like below a certain income level, they'll give you a work study where
Hmm.
you go to university and you do a job and you're paid for it. But the people you work for don't have to pay you. Technically, your salary is paid by the federal government. So that's a work
Hmm.
study. And
Hmm.
so I got a work study and went out of my way to get one in just any lab environment because I was gung ho about medical school and knew you needed
Hmm.
these experiences. I
Hmm.
mean, that was an organic chemistry lab looking at plants. It did not interest me, and I didn't stay there long. But
Hmm.
having that on my resume is what set me apart, and it was a big part of the reason I got the job at the Salk Institute.
Hmm.
And so it's like really that first experience you got to really fight for. And once you have that first experience, it's a lot easier to get further ones. I got
Hmm.
really lucky at the Salk Institute because like I applied to a bunch of jobs. Salk is the
Hmm.
only interview I got. So I tried
Hmm.
really hard. I when I was interviewing, I like put in the work, spent hours and hours like reading their papers, trying to understand the work they were doing so I could have good questions to ask. And
Hmm.
so some people in the lab said it was my curiosity and my clear effort to understand it that got me the job. But the person
Hmm.
whose decision it actually was, she said, my lab manager, she said, no, it's because you had lab experience. Like that's how you
Hmm.
got it. So you need to get that first experience as early as you can because the older you get, if you don't have any of those like paid on your resume experiences, it becomes harder and harder.
Hmm.
Um, and there are opportunities. I mean, if you've got some nepotism on your side, use it. You
Hmm.
know, if you've got a family member or a family friend who knows somebody who can get you an experience, like you have to do anything to get that first one, and
Hmm.
then from there on, it becomes easier.
Right. I do understand that getting into these fields, like finally getting into these fields, like getting accepted can be fulfilling. But I do also understand that like with new opportunities come new challenges. Have you ever felt extremely challenged or quote unquote broken down during a point of your journey in this neuroscience?
I've found that it is not the experiences that will break you down, it's bad
Hmm.
people that will break you down.
I
If
see.
you have good people around you, a good support system, and if your coworkers are like good, nice people, you can get help because
Hmm.
science is so inherently collaborative. And if you hit a
Hmm.
wall, you can just ask people for help and it'll be frustrating, but it won't break you down. What breaks you down is bad people. So I've had bad experiences with people who are just straight up mean.
Hmm.
And that is what breaks you down more than
Hmm.
anything. So it's also really important if you get these experiences, like do your best to put yourself around people who are clearly like friendly and nice. So like an example of somebody I worked with is somebody who would tell you to do something and then you would do it in the way that you thought they wanted you to do it, but they didn't teach you properly and then got
Hmm.
mad when you didn't do it, right? Like that
Hmm.
kind of person is
Right.
really, really toxic and you've got to stay
Hmm.
away from that. If somebody's going to mentor you, if somebody's going to teach you, they have to take responsibility if you don't do it right the first or second time.
Right.
If they start blaming you because you didn't do it right the first time, that's like a really bad sign and you need to avoid that person because they're really
Right.
toxic.
Because you are involved with a lot of research, I am a bit curious if you are just focusing on your structured and like sort of quote unquote assigned, or if you have any sort of like passion projects alongside this.
When you get to graduate school, it's all passion project. Well, it depends on whose lab you're in. So I joined a lab, and it depends on your mentor. Once you get
Hmm.
to the graduate school for neuroscience, and at some institutions,
Hmm.
like you can join a lab where the pr primary investigator, the PI, basically your boss, the leader of the
Hmm.
lab, you can join a lab where they have a set project. They're like, I want you to characterize this drug on this receptor in this mouse, go. And you have to
Hmm.
just do that. And if you want any side projects, you have to find them.
Hmm.
I joined a lab where my PI is like, what do you want to do?
Hmm.
And so I'm constantly trying new things. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm a trained biologist, but I've had my PI has given me the time and I've had to take the time to learn like engineering skills. So right now I'm doing 3D design on my computer. I'm getting into electronics now. Coding is something I've had to pick up.
Mhm.
Also wet lab skills. So my whole job is kind of passion projects. The important thing is
Mhm.
once you find something that's once you get a good result, you do have to stick through it to
Mhm.
the end. You got to stick
Mhm.
with it to the end, but it really
Mhm.
depends on whose lab you join.
Mhm.
Because yeah, there's a lot of labs where it's just you're given a project and it's like go for it. I have
Mhm.
friends like that who
Mhm.
yeah. Um, so
Um,
it depends on how you set yourself up. You have a
yeah.
lot of choice and agency in this. And
Mhm.
so if you join a lab where you are given a project and no freedom, and then you complain about not having freedom, like you need to know yourself really well and pick something that'll be good for you.
Mhm. And because you said this is like quote unquote like it's like your own will to find whatever projects, do you feel like you have been involved in newer areas of neuroscience or things that interest you, or is this more like classic traditional neuroscience, quote unquote?
I think a lot of there's new areas of neuroscience because somebody discovered something like really fundamentally new, and I have
Hmm.
friends in that. And
Hmm.
then there's classic neuroscience where there's been open questions for a long time, and we've just
Hmm.
now gotten the tools to use them.
Hmm.
So a new area of neuroscience I would say is like the gut-brain axis. People right now are discovering about how the microbiome in your stomach greatly affects brain function. That's all new
Hmm.
stuff. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, there's a lot of basic science that has to be done to characterize basic things in that field. Whereas
Hmm.
if you work in like learning and memory, I mean,
Hmm.
the hippocampus is an area of the brain that has been studied every which way for decades. And so, if you're
Hmm.
in that field, you have to be using the most cutting edge techniques of all time to be able to set yourself apart. And you're in
Right.
direct competition with a lot of people. So, it
Hmm.
depends. Yeah, I work with zebra finches, these songbirds, and it's simultaneously a bit of both because
Hmm.
a lot of things that have been researched in people, non-human primates, and mice
Hmm.
can be kind of discovered in the bird, and you have to set that precedent.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of areas in the bird that have been well studied in mammals, but not well studied in birds. So you can
Hmm.
study them in the birds to see if things are the same, if things are different, conserved across species.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it depends on what you study. I mean, you just got to
Hmm.
study what's interesting to you.
Hmm.
Although I'll say if you study anything enough, it could become interesting as long as
Hmm.
you're interested in like mechanics and just
Hmm.
curiosity. I truly like true scientists and people who are, if you're really cut out for this, you can find any science interesting with enough effort.
Hmm. Um, and because you have a lot of lab and research experience for this neuroscience, I know this is a bit of a general question, maybe a bit vague, but how often are animal subjects used relative to actual like humans who willingly participate?
I'll preface this statement by saying that you have to test causality in science a lot of
Hmm.
times.
Hmm.
So if we want to know that a brain area does something in humans, all you can
Hmm.
do is make a human do a task and
Hmm.
then measure signals from their brain and see if they turn on or off during certain tasks. Now that
Hmm.
is simply correlation. If
Hmm.
you want to test causality, you have to make a person do a task. Let's say
Hmm.
it's a reaching task and the motor cortex lights up when they reach out.
Hmm.
In order to establish causality, you have to then go in and destroy that brain area or
Hmm.
affect it in some way and then see if they can still do the task. It's like the
Hmm.
basic thing. And you cannot do that in humans.
Hmm.
So a lot of animal work is dedicated to, especially neuroscience and in all things, is messing up these systems, manipulating them in some way. And so yes, a lot of animals are used, but people have spent a lot of time and money making sure that everything is ethical and the animals are not an undue pain unless you're
Hmm.
researching pain. Like if you're
Hmm.
doing pain research, like the spinal cord, there was an itch study that I was a part of where they had to,
Hmm.
make the mice itch a lot, and so you'd have
Hmm.
to inject them with chemicals to give them like irritation, stuff like that. It's part of the research.
Hmm.
Um, but there's never um, undue pain put onto the animals. But
Hmm.
the rate at which some big labs go through mice is a lot. When I was doing Atlas work,
Hmm.
I would probably, they would be breeding a lot of time, but to get all the data I need for an Atlas, I'd need to sacrifice like 2 or 3 mice a week
Oh, wow.
continuously for about a year and a half. And that's not abnormal, but
Hmm.
once again, it's painless and yeah.
Hmm. And can I ask what projects or research you are doing currently at UT Southwestern?
I can tell you a little bit about songbird research, but since this is
Hmm.
public, I won't give away anything. Well, I can tell you a
Hmm.
recent thing that just got published in our lab.
Hmm.
So songbirds are interesting because all of the other animal species that are studied do not learn vocal imitation. So,
Hmm.
there's two parts of that. You can speak, and, mice have grunts and monkeys have hoots and hollers.
Hmm.
But one thing that they don't do is that those are genetically encoded, that they're
Hmm.
born with the ability to squeak and hoot and holler.
Hmm.
Whereas we as humans are born with the ability to babble and make hunts and
Right.
hollers, but then we have to grow up and learn the language and things like that.
Right.
And it's purely through imitation. You could take a baby from anywhere in the world and
Hmm.
raise it in Spain, and it'll
Right.
get a Spanish accent and learn
Hmm.
Spanish.
Hmm.
And that's purely learning through imitation. And the only species that can do that is songbirds. At least, not the
Hmm.
only species that can do that, but the only one that we study is
Hmm.
songbirds.
Right.
And so we look at what's happening in the brain when they're learning and when they're producing this speech. And so, like, if I can go quick about it, a recent postdoc in my lab just did a bunch of work that showed that there's one area of the brain in the songbird that is responsible for producing the song, and
Hmm.
that they need all this different input, sensory feedback, all this other stuff in order to build up the memory of the song while they're learning.
Hmm.
But then once they're adults, the brain does it totally independently and doesn't need
Right.
sensation at all to just produce it. It has implications because your spinal cord, when you do walk repetitive motions like walking
Hmm.
or like crawling or things
Hmm.
like that, people have spent a long time showing that that is totally independent of brain input and sensory feedback. You don't have to
Hmm.
think about walking, it just happens.
Hmm.
So, did when you do a repetitive thing like speaking, you don't have to think about it. It just kind of happens. You don't have to
Right.
spend any amount of thought thinking about how to make a word. Now, is that
Hmm.
automated? Does it rely on sensory feedback? This discovery in songbirds um, indicates that it's totally automatic once you've already mastered a skill. And so
Right.
my further work now is looking more into what's happening in the brain when to make sure for a fact that it's automatic. And
Hmm.
that's all I can say right
Right.
now.
I think this is I think quite frankly, it's groundbreaking research because I think you can just simply study and I think you can apply it. But speaking of this, do you think AI or any artificial intelligence tools will have a big part in neuroscience? Or is neuroscience more like a hands-on human-based thing?
Oh, it's big for data analysis. So um, AI is an advanced form of machine learning, and machine learning is
Hmm.
something that has already existed for a long time. Clustering algorithms,
Hmm.
a bunch of data science is based on machine learning. AI is just a
Hmm.
really advanced nonlinear way of sorry, I'm doing some a
Hmm.
nonlinear way of achieving that. So right now, AI is actually very big for data analysis. So there's a published thing you can do where like you can record neural activity from the brain, and then if it's from an area of the brain that hasn't been studied before, and then there's a behavior that they're doing, let's say it's a mouse going through a maze, and you're
Hmm.
not studying the classic maze areas, you're studying a new area of the brain. Well,
Hmm.
now there's AI tools that can help you correlate neural activity with behavior in a way that you couldn't do with classical analysis techniques. It's
Hmm.
for like exploratory analysis where you're like, I have
Hmm.
no idea what this brain area is doing, but
Hmm.
is there a way I can find a connection between this brain area's activity and the behavior? If
Hmm.
I don't know what to look for, because a big part of data analysis is you kind of, statistics is testing if something you believe is true or not. But what if
Hmm.
you have no idea what to believe? You don't even know where to
Yeah.
start. That's where this exploratory stuff comes in. So AI is big for
Hmm.
that. AI is big for sometimes like acquiring images. You want it to be really high resolution so you can see individual cells, but that takes super long time.
Hmm.
So a new thing in neuroscience is they've trained AI to essentially upscale data so it's a higher
Hmm.
resolution despite
Hmm.
the actual physical acquisition being at a lower resolution. So it's
Hmm.
speeding up data acquisition, things like that. It's not going to wholesale come up with ideas for you or come up with experiments for you.
Hmm.
It's not even close to that. But what it can do is help data analysis really is what it's
Hmm.
for right now.
Hmm. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Jeremy Brusch. I enjoyed this time with you and I learned a lot. I
Hmm.
really appreciate the opportunity for you being here today, and thank you.